Then all the sons of Israel came out from Dan to Beersheba, including the land of Gilead. And the congregation assembled as one man to the Lord at Mizpah. And the chiefs of all the people, of all the tribes of Israel, presented themselves in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 men on foot that drew the sword. Now the Benjamites heard that the sons of Israel had gone up to Mizpah. And the sons of Israel said, Tell us, how was this wickedness brought to pass? And the Levite, the husband of the woman who was murdered, answered and said, I came to Gibeah that belongs to Benjamin, I and my concubine, to spend the night. And the men of Gibeah rose against me, and surrounded the house by night. They meant to kill me, and they ravished my concubine, and she is dead. And I took my concubine, and cut her in pieces, and sent her throughout all the country of the inheritance of Israel. For they have committed abomination and wantonness in Israel. Behold, you sons of Israel, all of you, give your advice and counsel here. And all the people arose as one man, saying, None of us will go to his tent, and none of us will return to his house. But now this is what we will do to Gibeah. We will go up against it by lot, and we will take 10 men of 100 throughout all the tribes of Israel, and 100 of 1,000, and 1,000 of 10,000, to bring provisions for the people, that when they come they may repay Gibeah of Benjamin, for all the wanton crime which they have committed in Israel. So all the men of Israel gathered against the city, united as one man. And the tribes of Israel sent men through all the tribe of Benjamin, saying, What wickedness is this that has taken place among you? Now therefore give up the men, the base fellows in Gibeah, that we may put them to death, and put away evil from Israel. But the Benjamites would not listen to the voice of their brethren, the sons of Israel. And the Benjamites came together out of the cities of Gibeah to go out to battle against the sons of Israel. And the Benjamites mustered out of their cities on that day 26,000 men that drew the sword, besides the inhabitants of Gibeah, who mustered 700 picked men. Among all these were 700 picked men who were left-handed. Every one could sling a stone at a hair, and not miss. And the men of Israel, apart from Benjamin, mustered 400,000 men that drew sword. All these were men of war. The sons of Israel arose and went up to Bethel, and inquired of God, Which of us shall go up first to battle against the Benjamites? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up first. Then the sons of Israel rose in the morning, and encamped against Gibeah. And the men of Israel went out to battle against Benjamin. And the men of Israel drew up the battle line against them at Gibeah. The Benjamites came out of Gibeah, and struck down on that day 22,000 men of the Israelites. But the people, the men of Israel, took courage, and again formed the battle line in the same place where they had formed it on the first day. And the sons of Israel went up and wept before the Lord until the evening. And they inquired of the Lord, Shall we again draw near to battle against our brethren the Benjamites? And the Lord said, Go up against them. So the sons of Israel came near against the Benjamites the second day, and Benjamin went against them out of Gibeah the second day, and struck down 18,000 men of the sons of Israel. All these were men who drew the sword. Then all the sons of Israel, the whole army, went up and came to Bethel and wept. They sat there before the Lord and fasted all day until evening, and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And the sons of Israel inquired of the Lord, for the ark of the covenant of God was there in those days. And Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, ministered before it in those days, saying, Shall we yet again go out to battle against our brethren the Benjamites, or shall we cease? And the Lord said, Go up, for tomorrow I will give them into your hand. So Israel set men in ambush round about Gibeah, and the sons of Israel went up against the Benjamites on the third day, and set themselves in array against Gibeah, as at other times. And the Benjamites went out against the people, and were drawn away from the city. And as at other times, they began to strike and kill some of the people in the highways, one of which goes up to Bethel, and the other to Gibeah, and in the open country about 30 men of Israel. And the Benjamites said, They are routed before us, as at the first. But the men of Israel said, Let us flee, and draw them away from the city to the highways. And all the men of Israel rose up out of their place, and set themselves in array at Baal Tamar. And the men of Israel, who were in ambush, rushed out of their place west of Geba. And there came against Gibeah 10,000 picked men out of Israel, and the battle was hard, but the Benjamites did not know that disaster was close upon them. And the Lord defeated Benjamin before Israel. And the men of Israel destroyed 25,100 men of Benjamin that day. All these were men who drew the sword. So the Benjamites saw that they were defeated. The men of Israel gave ground to Benjamin, because they trusted to the men in ambush whom they had set against Gibeah. And the men in ambush made haste and rushed upon Gibeah. The men in ambush moved out and struck the whole city with the edge of the sword. Now the appointed signal between the men of Israel and the men in ambush was that when they made a great cloud of smoke rise up out of the city, the men of Israel should turn in battle. Now Benjamin had begun to strike and kill about 30 men of Israel. They said, "Surely they are struck down before us, as in the first battle." But when the signal began to rise out of the city in a column of smoke, the Benjamites looked behind them, and behold, the whole city went up in smoke to heaven. Then the men of Israel turned, and the men of Benjamin were dismayed, for they saw that disaster was close upon them. Therefore they turned their backs before the men of Israel in the direction of the wilderness. But the battle overtook them, and those who came out of the cities destroyed them in the midst of them. Cutting down the Benjamites, they pursued them and trod them down from Noahah as far as opposite Gibeah on the east. 18,000 men of Benjamin fell, all of them men of valor. And they turned and fled toward the wilderness, to the rock of Rimmon. 5,000 men of them were cut down in the highways, and they were pursued hard to Gidom. And 2,000 men of them were slain. So all who fell that day of Benjamin were 25,000 men that drew the sword, all of them men of valor. But 600 men turned and fled toward the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon, and abode at the rock of Rimmon 4 months. And the men of Israel turned back against the Benjamites, and struck them with the edge of the sword, men and beast, and all that they found. And all the towns which they found they set on fire. Now the men of Israel had sworn at Mizpah, "No one shall give his daughter in marriage to Benjamin." And the people came to Bethel, and sat there till evening before God, and they lifted up their voices and wept bitterly. And they said, "O Lord, the God of Israel, why has this come to pass in Israel, that there should be today one tribe lacking in Israel?" And the next day the people rose early, and built there an altar, and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. And the sons of Israel said, "Which of all these tribes of Israel did not come up in the assembly to the Lord?" For they had taken a great oath concerning him, who did not come up to the Lord to Mizpah, saying, "He shall be put to death." And the sons of Israel had compassion for Benjamin their brother, and said, "One tribe is cut off from Israel this day. What shall we do for wives for those who are left, since we have sworn by the Lord that we will not give them any of our daughters for wives?" And they said, "What one is there of the tribes of Israel that did not come up to the Lord to Mizpah?" And behold, no one had come to the camp from Jabesh Gilead to the assembly. For when the people were mustered, behold, no one of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead was there. So the congregation sent 12,000 of their bravest men there, and commanded them, "Go and strike the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, also the women and the little ones. This is what you shall do. Every male and every woman that has lain with a male you shall utterly destroy." And they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins who had not known man by lying with him. And they brought them to the camp at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. Then the whole congregation sent word to the Benjamites, who were at the rock of Rimmon, and proclaimed peace to them. And Benjamin returned at that time, and they gave them the women whom they had saved alive of the women of Jabesh Gilead, but they did not suffice for them. And the people had compassion on Benjamin, because the Lord had made a breach in the tribes of Israel. Then the elders of the congregation said, "What shall we do for wives for those who are left, since the women are destroyed out of Benjamin?" And they said, "There must be an inheritance for the survivors of Benjamin, that a tribe be not blotted out from Israel." Yet we cannot give them wives of our daughters. For the sons of Israel had sworn, Cursed be who gives a wife to Benjamin. So they said, Behold, there is the yearly feast of the Lord at Shiloh, which is north of Bethel, on the east of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem, and south of Lebonah. And they commanded the Benjamites, saying, Go and lie in wait in the vineyards, and watch. If the daughters of Shiloh come out to dance in the dances, then come out of the vineyards, and seize each man his wife from the daughters of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin. And when their fathers or their brothers come to complain to us, we will say to them, Grant them graciously to us, because we did not take for each man of them his wife in battle, neither did you give them to them, else you would now be guilty. And the Benjamites did so, and took their wives according to their number from the dancers, whom they carried off. Then they went and returned to their inheritance, and rebuilt the towns, and dwelt in them. And the sons of Israel departed from there at that time, every man to his tribe and family, and they went out from there every man to his inheritance. In those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. O sing to the Lord a new song. Sing to the Lord, all the earth. Sing to the Lord, bless his name. Tell of his salvation from day to day. Declare his glory among the nations, his marvelous works among all the peoples. For great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised. He is to be feared above all gods, for all the gods of the peoples are idols. But the Lord made the heavens. Honor and majesty are before him. Strength and beauty are in his sanctuary. Ascribe to the Lord, O families of the peoples. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Bring an offering and come into his courts. Worship the Lord in holy attire. Tremble before him, all the earth. Say among the nations, the Lord reigns. Yes, the world is established. It shall never be moved. He will judge the peoples with equity. Let the heavens be glad, and let the earth rejoice. Let the sea roar, and all that fills it. Let the field exult, and everything in it. Then shall all the trees of the woods sing for joy before the Lord, for he comes to judge the earth. He will judge the world with righteousness, and the peoples with his truth. One Sabbath, when he went to dine at the house of a ruler who belonged to the Pharisees, they were watching him, and behold, there was a man before him who had dropsy. And Jesus spoke to the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? But they were silent. Then he took him and healed him, and let him go. And he said to them, Which of you, having a son or an ox that has fallen into a well, will not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day? And they could not reply to this. Now he told a parable to those who were invited, when he marked how they chose the places of honor, saying to them, When you are invited by anyone to a marriage feast, do not sit down in a place of honor, lest a more eminent man than you be invited by him. And he who invited you both will come and say to you, Give place to this man, and then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, Friend, go up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. He said also to the man who had invited him, When you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your kinsmen or rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return, and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you. You will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. After the outrageous violent crime of Judges 19, the whole nation of Israel is provoked to war against the tribe of Benjamin. Moreover, the other tribes of Israel swear not to give their daughters in marriage to any Benjamites, which prompts a new bride shortage crisis. They can only think of more violence and kidnapping to solve the new problem. Judges is the book of what not to do. The immorality and violence, which keep spiraling out of control, show the need for a national moral authority, a king. Indeed, it is the Lord's kingship over creation that holds the world together. Psalm 96, verse 10, invites us to say, "The Lord reigns." His kingly authority brings justice and truth to the world. Jesus invites us to participate in his magnanimous reign, the polar opposite of the chaotic anarchy of the Judges period, by inviting the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind to our feasts. These lowly persons will not be able to reciprocate, so the Lord will repay on their behalf. When you have opportunity, will you fight or will you invite?